Welcome to another edition of Weird News and Wacky History, a look behind the scenes of what's been happening throughout the years. I'm your host, Pastor Roland Moss, that old history dude. Think getting around town is hard these days? Then try space travels! For everyone old enough to remember, the Mercury 7 astronauts were as close as America ever came to superheroes. Every red-blooded kid wanted to be John Glenn when he blasted off in Friendship 7 on February 20th, 1962, to orbit the Earth 3 times over some 5 hours. Glenn reported that the view outside his tiny window was spectacular. And then the lights appeared. On a second planetary orbit, Glenn was amazed to see his vessel completely surrounded by, quote, a big mass of thousands of very small particles that are brilliantly lit up like they're luminescent, unquote. Glenn described each tiny yellowish-green globe as a firefly on a real dark night. Scientists back at Mission Control were mystified. Glenn thought it was a miracle, while NASA scientists whispered to each other about extraterrestrials. But it was a careful examination of the capsule schematics that solved the mystery. The Mercury 7 spacecraft was equipped with a complex system of vents and baffles to carry away excess weight that would burn up too much fuel, and therein lay the secret of the tiny alien lights. And so John Glenn completed his orbits of Earth and flew into the history books, surrounded by an eerily illuminated cloud of his own frozen pee. Things took a strange turn for the Gemini program as well. It was December of 1965. Fighting in Vietnam was heating up and Cold War tensions were high. The space race was in full swing, with the Russians seemingly in the lead while America played catch-up. Then on December 15th, Wally Schirra and Tom Stafford aboard Gemini 6 thrilled NASA by rendezvousing in orbit with Frank Borman and Jim Lovell in Gemini 7. But if NASA was abuzz about the space meetup, another transmission of Schirra and Stafford was electrifying. Quote, we have an object, looks like a satellite going from north to south, probably in polar orbit. Looks like he might be going to re-enter soon. You just might let me pick up the thing. I see a command module and 8 smaller modules out front. As Mission Control was going into panic mode, suddenly a new sound came over the comlink. Jingle bells being played on a harmonica backed up by the sound of jingling bells. Schirra and Stafford had smuggled a tiny harmonica and minuscule ring of wreath bells aboard. The first instruments ever played in space, Gemini 6's Santa spoof instruments can now be seen on display in the second floor of the Smithsonian's Air and Space Museum. So, what happens when you drop something in outer space? NASA has historically put their astronauts through numerous scenarios of things that could go horribly wrong far from home in outer space. But try as you might, it's always going to be some catastrophe you can't prepare for. Rear Admiral Ken Mattingly, command module pilot of the Apollo 16 moon mission, also flew 2 separate shuttle missions. But it was in the weightlessness of outer space on the second day of the 1972 Apollo flight that his wedding ring simply floated off his finger and disappeared somewhere inside the incredibly complex innards of the Apollo capsule. Everyone joined the search, but the ring had vanished. Apollo 16 flew to the moon, landed on the lunar surface for 3 days, then rendezvoused with the capsule in orbit to head home again. Along the way, Mattingly and fellow astronaut General Charles Duke had a spacewalk to run some experiments outside the vessel. Then a sparkle caught Duke's eye as through the open hatch floated the missing ring. Seemingly headed for orbit, it ricocheted off the back of Mattingly's helmet to be perfectly caught as it floated back to Duke. Many romantics say, I love you to the moon and back, but that proved especially true for Ken and Elizabeth Mattingly. So, want to get into space someday? Then join the Scouts. Does space travel intrigue you? Does the dream of weightlessness and working in zero gravity fascinate you? Do the adventures of the Mercury 7 and the Apollo astronauts inspire you? Want a head start towards the stars? Then join the Scouts. The Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts have played a tremendous role in NASA. Just listen to the statistics as of 2011. Of the 312 astronauts and engineers selected for the space program since 1959, at least 207 have been active in scouting, including 41 Eagle Scouts. That's 66.3%. Of the 24 men that journeyed to the moon on Apollo missions, 20 were Scouts, an astonishing 83.3%, and 11 of the 12 men who walked on the moon from 1968 to 1972, an amazing 91.6%, were also Scouts. And when things went terribly wrong on Apollo 13, threatening to strand Dick Lovell, Jack Swigert, and Fred Hayes in outer space, a contributing factor to their safe return was a crew composed entirely of Boy Scouts. NASA's Deputy Administrator Pam Melroy is a former Girl Scout, as was Kathleen Sullivan, 3-time shuttle astronaut and the first American woman to walk in space. And 5 former Girl Scouts will be members of the upcoming Artemis mission to the moon. Scouts to infinity and beyond. And that's about all the time we have for this episode of Weird News and Wacky History, a look behind the scenes at what's been happening through the years. I'm your host, Pastor Roland Moss, author, historian, and speaker, wishing that all of your history may be just a bit weird.